And Happy New Year. Welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, you're up this week in our first episode of 2026.
Is it 2026 already?
It is, and what a year it has been already.
It still feels like 2025 out there.
Yeah. Sure? Gosh, well, what are you bringing to the table today?
Well, before we get to what I'm bringing to the table today, let me start this year by saying unequivocally abolish ICE.
Yes.
They've got no business killing people outside of their home, like what happened to Keith Porter, or killing people in their moving vehicles like Renee Good, or killing people during a traffic stop like Silverio Villegas Gonzalez in Chicago last September, or killing Carlos Roberto Montoya Valdez outside of Home Depot in Monrovia, California last year, or having 33 people die in ICE custody last year. And I also just saw something that another person died in custody recently.
Yeah.
Or have hundreds of people just go missing at the Everglades Detention Center.
Yeah.
So before we get into talking about the documentary, I wanted to say that because the way that our podcast moves is we choose a topic and then we focus on the topic. And then sometimes other things happen in between.
Sometimes lots of things happen in between.
Yes. Yep. So I just wanted to pause before we get into talking about the documentary that we watched and say that abolish ICE.
Absolutely. Cosign.
All right. Well, I am bringing the documentary Eyes of Gaza to the table today. It was released in 2024. The film follows 3 journalists in Gaza as the siege and genocide rages. We see journalists interact with their family members and joke with one another in these little moments, like trying to find cell phone signal and marking out on a wall where the best spot is for their phone. They talk to children who are playing with tires, have made a game out of playing with tires. They talk to people who have lost their home. We see the brutality that the people in Gaza are facing each day, both through the actions of the IDF and the lack of aid getting in. This is a harrowing film. It lays bare what the experience has been for people living through the siege in Gaza as Mohammed Ahmed, Mahmoud Sabah, and Abdal Kader Sabah try to do their jobs and report on what's happening to people and tell the stories of what's happening in Gaza. And we see them risk their lives day in and day out to tell the stories of Gaza.
Yes.
And it's a lot. It was overwhelming in several points.
Yeah.
For a 50-minute film.
Yeah,
I think it was
quick.
about that.
It was quick.
So there's a lot in it. A lot happens, and it's very impactful.
Yeah.
But where do you want to start? What do you want to talk about?
No, I agree. It was both a phenomenal documentary, but also a chilling one in so many ways. I remember when you were thinking about what you might want to bring to the table, and you were talking about this one. I was excited about this one because, it would give us a chance to talk about the atrocities that have been taking place in Palestine, but from this unique perspective that we haven't really had before. And in my mind, initially, I thought that was just the perspective of these journalists and getting to talk about journalism, but there's actually so much more to this film than that I wasn't really prepared for. But I was hooked immediately by the opening scenes of this documentary where we see these reporters that you named running for safety, running for their lives, while gunfire is going off and bombs are being dropped in the city. And we see reporters being treated by doctors and getting shrapnel removed from their bodies.
Yep.
And then there's this opening stat a few minutes in to the film that says that so far 163 journalists have been killed since the beginning of the genocide in Gaza. And as you mentioned, this was in 2024. So that was as of July of 2024. And so we know that number has risen since then. And so this was a compelling documentary for those reasons. It was also compelling because of just the raw footage that we get to see. And you sort of alluded to this. We see the utter destruction of Palestine, of Gaza. We see the famine. We see the unimaginable and unlivable conditions as these reporters are walking through the city, as kids are riding their bikes through the streets and through the rubble and making games out of tires, as you said. And we see the community coming together to try and help one another and to try to live. And it's just so surreal and sad to see what has become of Gaza, a place where human beings live. And to see them live like this was just really gut-wrenching. And I think that's why this film was so powerful. And it's a must-watch. It's hard to watch. It was hard to get through, but I think it's a must-watch to really take in what has been done to the humanity of the people that live there and to this place.
Yeah. One of the things that was obvious very early is how little there is left.
Yeah.
We see Mahmoud, and Abdelkader walking each day to do their reporting, and they're walking through rubble. They're surrounded by some buildings that are still standing, but nothing really seems to be intact.
No.
Outside of maybe the place where we see them wake up and where they sleep. Everything's damaged in some way.
Yes.
And it really illustrates some of the aerial pictures that I've seen of northern Gaza being nearly completely destroyed. And it's hard to fathom how this makes sense.
Yeah.
And how people can try to survive there. One of the things in watching this was trying to think about how I would live through that.
Yeah.
And it's so distant from any of my experiences that it was hard for me to try to understand what that would even be.
Yeah.
And so, that's one part that's hard to understand. And then the other part is, why does the continued attack make any sense here?
Why is that necessary?
There's so little here, and this was released in 2024, so that bombing has continued.
Yeah.
And so it's just hard to comprehend the whole thing when you can see it up close like this, that this is where we're at. This is what this devastation has wrought. And, you mentioned them talking to kids. We mentioned them playing with tires.
Yeah.
And, they speak to the kids and have a little conversation with them. And as they walk away, they say, God save them. They have seen darker days than the blackest of nights. Mm-hmm. And it just, again, it's unfathomable.
Yes.
What these kids have had to live through and survive, and what they, from that moment on up till now, even if they are still with us, what they've had to make it through. And so it's little moments like this in the film that really illustrate the human story of it all, and who is impacted and how they've been impacted. And I think that was really powerful.
Oh, yeah. Well, you reminded me that, we see so much. We see like a full days where bombs are just dropped for hours. And it's like, why? There is nothing left. Why are we still dropping bombs on this city where there literally is nothing left to do?
Yeah.
And so, that stood out to me. And also the children. The interviews with the children were really hard. I mean, I think one of the children said something to the effect of, I'd just rather be in heaven. I mean, something to that effect. Yeah. And it just broke my heart. Mm-hmm. And so, we're talking here about humanity. There's an incredible scene in the film where the journalists interview a man in Southeast Gaza, which was the most recent area that had been invaded by the Israeli army at the time. And this man's home had been destroyed. And so he's sitting out in front of it. And what he said in this interview really struck me. He said this when they asked him to describe what's going on. So he said, quote, "Destruction in every sense of the word. I swear to God, it feels like an earthquake hit the area. And this goes against all earthly laws, all of them. What did these buildings and lands do wrong? What did these poor people do wrong? What resistance are you talking about, man? There is no resistance here. The resistance doesn't conceal itself among the people. The resistance bushes and finds them where they are. But they came to destroy, just to destroy, as you see. They want to make the area uninhabitable."
Yeah.
And that just moved me so much. He touched on all of the innocent lives that have been lost and forever changed because of this destruction and this war and this genocide. And he touched on the land. And we've talked about how important the land is to the Palestinian people, and also how important land is to our entire ecosystem, all of us. And so the destruction of the land and rendering it uninhabitable will have severe consequences on this region and well beyond it for years and years. And so all of that in that interview really brought that piece into focus for me of just the sheer destruction, not only to the people, but also to the land as well.
Yeah, and how much, we've seen people talking about the ecocide
Yeah.
that's also happening,
Yes.
and this being a version of an illustration of that too, I think is important to note.
Yes.
So there's this moment at the end of the film that I want to talk about, stood out to me. The whole group of journalists is talking to one of their children.
Yeah.
And they ask him, you alluded to this, they ask him if he worries about his dad. And he says, yes, I worry he will not see the bomb and he would disappear. No one would bury him. No one would find him. And just being a dad and thinking about how much I always want to soothe the fears and worries of my kids as much as I can.
Yeah.
And how impossible that would be in that situation.
Yeah.
And I'd have to choose between a bold-faced lie that they would see through, I think, immediately.
Yeah.
Or feeling like I can't do what I'm supposed to do
Yeah.
as a dad, and help them not to feel too worried or overwhelmingly worried.
Yes.
And it was a lot.
Yeah.
It hit me. And, then they kept talking, and this is what you alluded to. And he said something along the lines of wanting to die because it would be better in heaven.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be this.
Yeah.
And all of that was just a lot.
Yeah.
In that interaction. It was also very loving because these men are I think talking openly with one another.
Yes.
and including their son, and trying to encourage this kid to go into journalism
Yes.
too. And there's that moment, which is also a beautiful, I think, end to that scene, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
And so it's just a very powerful scene to see them interact with one of their sons.
Yes.
And talk about, to hear the son just talk about things in that way, that directly, and then to see them sort of, how do we move on from that?
Yeah.
It's, I think, really challenging and impossible even, but to say like, well, you should be a journalist too, because you should tell these stories.
Yeah, and they had him try on the journalism vest, and he's so proud and looks so just adorable in it. Yeah, that scene was tough, and again, speaking of the humanity of it all, what stood out to me there in that piece, in that moment, the dad is doing what you talked about there, but the kid clearly has a relationship with those two other men, and then I think he called them uncle. Clearly, all three of these men care about that young man, and they're trying to just have this conversation like you talk about. But how do you? It's such a surreal conversation to try to have with the child in that moment, and the things that the kid says. You're right, just. It broke my heart.
Heartbreaking. Yeah.
It broke my heart. Yeah. Another powerful scene in this film is when the three journalists visit one of their fellow journalists named Abdullah in the hospital, who has had to have multiple surgeries after being a victim in one of the airstrikes. And what Abdullah says about the importance of journalism is a huge takeaway from this film. From his hospital bed, he says, quote, "They said that I was filming the destruction they were causing, documenting their plans, and they were annoyed with me for that. One of the most important roles of journalism is to stand with people and stand for the truth. The journalist's role is not after the war, but during it. Every one of us, when we go out on a mission, does not know if we will return or not. All of my colleagues keep in touch with me, whether they are foreigners or Arabs, from here or the South. They tell me, Abdullah, your safety comes first. I told them my mission comes first. The journalistic message must be delivered." And I don't know, to hear that man say that from his hospital bed, fighting for his life, I think powerful does not do it justice.
Yeah.
And not just with this genocide, but in all of the atrocities around the world. I think the role and importance and power of journalism and speaking truth to power and shining a light on the darkness is beyond important in terms of hopefully making it possible to intervene and stop whatever said atrocity is.
Yeah.
But, it just was such a powerful scene for me. And again, this man is fighting for his life. And he's saying, no, journalism is important. I'm called to this work. It's important. It's necessary.
Yeah. These stories have to be told.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about application.
Okay.
How does this documentary apply to our day-to-day lives and work? I'm going to repeat something here because that moment we see Abdullah in the hospital is my application.
Yeah.
Especially when he says one of the most important roles of journalism is to stand with people and stand for the truth. The journalist's role is not after the war, but during it. The truth matters.
Yeah.
These stories from Gaza matter. We need to understand what's happening here. And as you said, speaking truth to power and shining a light in the dark is important because otherwise we're all in the dark.
Yeah.
And we don't know what our empirical governments are doing to people across the globe.
Yes.
And, this made me think about how much we ignore the truths that are right in front of us because we're taught not to trust our eyes or our gut anymore.
Yeah.
And so we let go of those truths and attach to some other reality that's been spun up for us.
Yes.
So that's my application is that moment, that as you said, powerful.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe that doesn't encapsulate it quite enough, but that powerful moment where he's speaking about how important journalism is and how important these stories, being able to tell these stories are.
Absolutely. No, that's it. That's application for sure.
Yeah.
This documentary made me think about a lot of things, made me feel a lot of things, but it really made me think about our collective role in this genocide.
Oh, yeah.
I talked about the journalist's interview with an elder earlier, but they also interviewed another older gentleman in the film. And one of the things that this second gentleman said was, quote, "We're all on the front line." And I don't know what it was about that simple statement, "we're all on the front line," that got me, but it did. Yeah, I think in many ways, this man was talking about the Palestinian people being on the front lines of this genocide.
Yeah.
But I think this statement actually applies more broadly than that. The United States is 100% on the front lines of this genocide and is complicit in all of this chaos and all of this destruction and all of this death. And as is the world in a lot of ways. And so the toll on our collective humanity here, especially after watching this film, is indescribable. And, I said this before, but this film is just a visceral reminder that it is imperative that the world steps in and stops this so that, as you said, dads don't have to lie to their children, that people don't have to think about how they're taking care of themselves with bombs dropping in the background, that people are not worried about. I mean, there are scenes in this film where there are remains and they just don't know what they're going to do with the remains because they don't have time to do anything with them as bombs are dropping. Yeah. And so all of this has to stop. And so the application here, I think our applications work really well together there because we need the journalists and we need the truth, but we also need to think about how we stop this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. All right, well, how about homework?
Okay.
What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? I want to continue to hear these stories about Gaza and about the West Bank, whether they're current day stories or stories from the history of the colonization of Palestine. Yeah. I want to continue to hear these stories because I truly believe we can't be free until Palestinians are free.
Yes.
And the imperial violence the U.S. is doing in Venezuela is related to this.
Yes.
As is the genocide in Sudan and the Congo. So none of us are free until we all are free.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's my homework, is to continue to hear these stories because, again, I think it's also bearing witness. I think as somebody who's in the belly of the imperial beast, bearing witness to it feels like one of our small things we can do.
Yeah, and a responsibility, if that's the right word. I love that. I'll co-sign that homework. I would love to just continue to shine a light on what's going on in Palestine and continue to, as you say, sort of stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I want to do what I can to make it clear to my and our elected officials in our government that we need to cease our role in enabling this genocide, full stop. And so that's my homework. I also say that watching this documentary on Canopy made me think that there might be other documentaries on Canopy. Like, it's just such a great platform about the genocide in Gaza to check out. So, and lots of topics, of course, because Canopy is amazing. So I want to look into that as well.
Yeah, this was one of
you said a couple.
There were
you said a few. Yeah.
So if you search Gaza specifically, there are a few. But then if you search Palestine, that opens up to more. There are stories about the West Bank and settlements there and a lot of different things. So,
all right. Well, shout out to Canopy for that. And maybe we'll watch another one this year.
I'm sure we will.
I love that.
All right. Well, that's it for our conversation today about Eyes of Gaza. It's a really powerful film.
Yes.
Damien, you're up next time. What are you bringing to the table in our next episode?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring us back to the 6-part series in Inquest that we started reading last year.
Excellent.
Because we still have a couple more pieces from it. We're on part 5 of the series, which, as a reminder, the series is called Abolitionist Lessons from the Prison Belt, and it features these incredible conversations between Lydia Pellet-Hobbs, Judah Shept, Craig Gilmore, and Ruth Wilson Gilmore. So part 5 is titled Following the Money. And the tagline of the piece reads, quote, attempts by carceral authorities to shield their funding sources from public interference are proof that working to interrupt money flows is an effective way to oppose prisons. So I love that. This has been such an amazing series. So I'm looking forward to reading it and continuing to learn from it and talking about it with you next time.
Yes, me too. It's been a great thing to continue to learn from.
Yes.
People at Inquest are doing good stuff, publishing great work. All right, well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what we want you to do here. But in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating or review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. And we'll talk to you next week.
Abolish ICE.